Good afternoon and welcome to this press conference on deforestation. It's just 2 hours ago that Parliament, with an overwhelming majority, adopted a new regulation to fight global deforestation, to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. And with us today we have Parliament's rapporteur on this issue, Mr. Christophe HANSEN, who has been leading Parliament's negotiation team in the talks with Member States. So I'll first give the floor to Mr. Hansen for his introductory remarks, and then there will be a possibility for journalists either in the room or online to ask questions. Mr. Hansen, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you as well for joining this press conference. As it has just been said, we had a very strong majority in the vote in plenary for this new regulation, 522 votes in favour and some 40 against and some 40 abstentions. So this is a very strong result. I have to say it's even better than I expected, because I feared that there would be some last-minute people that would eventually not like what is on the table now, but I think the urgency of the matter demonstrates how important it is, and we lose every year around 10 million hectares of forests. This is a huge amount. This is is as big as Portugal, the size of Portugal, and what we have lost in the last 30 years is even as big as the entire European Union. So this has to be clear, and we don't want to be complicit anymore in this global deforestation that is happening a little bit in Europe, but as well and first and foremost in other parts in the world. And a lot of those products that are now under the scope of this regulation, and I think you have the details of the products, but I can briefly remind you. So we have wood, we have soy, we have cocoa, we have coffee, we have palm oil, and we added as well now the rubber to the scope, and we extended it as well to certain derivatives of those products. For example, palm oil derivatives that you could find in cosmetics or other transformed products. There were a lot of them missing actually in the annex by the Commission, so we made them add those. We have as well added charcoal, we have as well added printed paper, because in the end this is wood transformed somewhere else, and it wouldn't make sense just to say the wood, no, but the transformed product, yes. So we enlarged there substantially the scope. Now in the regulation we foresee as well 3 review clauses of this, because the Parliament initial position wanted to have the other wooded land, which would include zones in the world like the Cerrado in Brazil. We wanted them to be included as well in this regulation, even though there is not an FAO definition on other wooded land. Nonetheless, we have now invited the Commission to come up within 1 year with a review clause for this territorial scope, a second review after 2 years, where we could as well extend the scope for products and adapt, if needed, certain parameters, and then a third review after 5 years. I think the most tricky part is, of course, and that is for those that were reluctant to go ahead, this comes with a certain administrative burden, we have to say, because the new element is geolocation, so you need to track back the product that you have to the field where it has been produced. And this comes with a challenge, because often those products are collected in a cooperative and then transported to a huge trader that then ships the products in a huge transatlantic ship, and there of course the tracking is difficult, but I think it's not impossible, because soy, for example, is under the scope, but we manage already today, for example, to ship GMO-free soy apart, so there is a precedent how it can work, and I think we can find there are good solutions. And then another big challenge is, of course, we need to make it possible for every producer to comply with this regulation as well. And that's why we have as well pushed the Commission that they need to set up a system where we can help smallholders, for example. So smallholders in the cocoa sector, for example, 80% of the producers are smallholders that just have a few acres to produce. And there we need to give them as well the financial and technical assistance to be able to cope with the requirements by this new legal instrument. Otherwise, what would they do? Well, probably to deliver to somebody that is not having the same expectations as us. So we need to help the smallholders to participate in there. I think that's the key points, but you probably read as well the different files and the elements. So I'm at your disposal now for questions, and I can as well answer in several of the languages. If you prefer, French, English, German, and Spanish would work eventually as well. So the questions up to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen. I can add that we also have interpretation in Italian and Polish. So now open up the floors to questions, both in the room and online. And please, when you pose your question, please remember to state your name and the media that you represent.
Hello, thank you so much for this. I'm Wester van Gaal at EU Observer. I just wanted to ask a little bit more detail about the initial Commission proposal, which was based on a science cost-benefit analysis, and why yours different from that, and maybe go into the details a little bit yet.
Yes, of course, the Commission needs to base every proposal it makes on a thorough impact assessment. And there were mainly the 8 commodities that have been analyzed. The 6 that were finally in the proposal. Additionally, there was rubber and there was maize. The rubber, we had in our proposal from the Parliament both already in and several other products as well. But of course, we understand that the Commission needs to make as well this cost-benefit analysis as well, because it doesn't help us to include a product that is definitely not or very, very unlikely linked to deforestation, to add it, to make the checks and then overburden the customs authorities and all the actors with something that is not really a problem, an issue. And that's why the focus is on the most destroying products, let's say the products that are the most dangerous for, or the most likely to cause deforestation. So that is to have in the first place focus on that, to have the biggest impact possible and make the system first of all work. Once it works, we give ourselves the possibility to extend. There we had to come a little bit down from our high horse from the European Parliament side, but nonetheless I think we achieved quite substantial progress.
Yes, I see. If there are no more questions in the room, I think we have a couple of questions online. I think it's David, please.
Hello, is this working?
Yes, we hear you.
Hi. Yeah, the question is, in your press release earlier, you mentioned the possibility of this deblocking sort of trade negotiations. And this was one of the issues with Mercosur ratifying the FTA. I was wondering, do you see that pushing things forward there? And then the second thing is, you referred slightly to the review. Is that in 2026? And do you think that will extend to more products and to more types of land? Thanks.
Well, to answer first your last question, if there will be an extension of the scope, this will depend on the outcome of the respective impact assessment that the Commission is going to conduct. If those products are not as dangerous as we currently think they are for our forests, well, then we can argue. And then, if that's not the case, I suppose that the Commission is not going to include them in the review proposal, but still the review will be open. The goods have been impact assessed in the end by the Commission, so there's no excuse to say, no, we haven't done this, legally speaking. And then I think we as a Parliament will not withhold to bring those elements back in. But of course, it is crucial that now, first of all, the system works, and then we should ask ourselves the questions when we have gathered the experience, what a review should look like and what could be further included into the scope. Then, could you just repeat the first question that was on the trade relations? Yes, indeed, we know that there is a lot of resistance as well here in the European Parliament concerning trade agreements with partners that eventually are massively burning down forests to produce agricultural goods. And that is an issue, and that is something I think nobody wants that to happen. And that's why, and we also want that the Paris climate agreements should be respected as well from our trade partners. So I think it is essential, because forests are a huge storage for CO2, are a huge, they are not for no reason called the lungs of our globe. So I think it is very important to do that. But if we can have a clear impact with this regulation that deforestation is halted, well, I think there is an opportunity that this is taking away the problems that we currently have and that we currently see, then that we have this impact on the ground. And I think it is a can opener, we can say it so like that, or an enabler for trade, but if it's just the European Union having such a legislation, I think that will not be sufficient. So that's, for us, it's very important that we make this system work. And if it works, there are other economies, the USA, the first one, looking very closely at what we are doing here. And they are eventually going to the same path. And if we have this leading position, and we are leading by example here, and we make other economies come to that way, there we will have a lot of impact, and this will as well have impact in the producing country to come to a more sustainable way of production in order to be able to continue selling the products. And so I believe, yes, this can foster our trade relations with other economies. As well, Mercosur, you mentioned it, I think there we have a huge leverage.
Okay, I think we have another question online, but I should have brought my glasses. I can't really see the name, but if you have raised your hand online, then now you can press the speak button, introduce yourself, and push your question. I don't know if you're trying to speak now. I think you should be on, but we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Okay, but then feel free to reach out to us afterwards, either to me or to Mr. Hansen, and then we'll try to reply to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, try to speak up now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now you go through. Please go ahead with your question.
Mr. Hansen, thank you for giving me the floor. I have two questions. May I put my question in Spanish?
You can put your question in Spanish, but please, before you do, please introduce yourself as well and say which media you represent.
Okay, perfect. I'm Mirra Banchón, Deutsche Welle para América Latina. Señor Hansen, este reglamento es muy importante para países productores en América Latina. Y mi pregunta tiene dos partes. Uno, ¿cómo piensan medir la deforestación? O sea, el alcance de esta regulación. Y dos, ¿cuál es el eco que han tenido en los países productores? Y quizás una tercera parte de la pregunta es, ¿han considerado extender el scope, extender la gama también a los productos que dañan los manglares, como el camarón? Muchas gracias.
Yes, thank you very much for your questions. Of course, the scope, to reply to the last question first, the scope as it is currently defined is what we could achieve in the negotiations and what makes as well sense from the point of view that we have to strike a balance between the objective and the means that we can put into that. So this is a first thing. Then secondly, it is, and that's what I say, again, I already replied already before, to say now exactly what the scope, to what extent we will extend, or if the scope, that is something that really needs the scientific expertise. That is done ahead of a Commission proposal, and I don't want to preempt on what is coming out there. Could you just repeat the other question that you had? The question that you have were in two parts. On the producing countries.
What are the reactions to it? What are the reactions from the producing countries? The reactions to the Commission?
Well, the reaction in producing countries, well, all the countries in the world in the end are producing countries, we have to say, because wood, for example, is produced in the European Union as well, is produced in Indonesia, is produced in South America, where you are following us from. So that is a global good in the end, which is produced all over the world. So everybody is concerned, because we have to say this is not just applying to countries somewhere outside the European Union, it is as well applying to EU countries. Let's not forget that. And we have had as well very strong arguments with certain member states. The Swedes, the Finns are very concerned as well by the agreement we have found now. So I think there will be an impact, or there is when something changes, it has never in the first place positive receivance in the countries where it applies. So I think there everybody is a little bit in the same boat. Of course, we see as well that the rate of deforestation in certain parts in the Amazon region, for example, or in Indonesia, is way higher than in other parts in the world. In Africa as well, we have some parts where it is very high, but it's difficult to say that it is all over a continent, because in Latin America you have as well Costa Rica, for example, where the phenomena is not as huge as that. So I think in the producing countries there is, first of all, okay, there is something going to change. There is additional administrative burden that will afterwards go very easily, but when you have to do it for the first time, it is of course an effort, and that is something the producers and manufacturers and transformers and everybody is concerned with that, but that's why we have as well the appropriate phasing into the system, because we know that as well production cycles are often annually, so we have added the flexibility, and we have as well, as I said in the beginning, forced the European Commission to help in the producing countries, for example, cooperatives and smallholders, to be able to cope with the requirements by this regulation. And that's why I believe, of course, there is a certain reluctance in the beginning when something changes, but in the end, I think the positive impact will be as well felt on the ground, because losing forests is as well losing life space for biodiversity, is losing life space for indigenous people, for example, as well. And this is really something we have to work. And then climate change, if we don't halt it or slow it down, at least the life conditions in all the countries over the world will be worse. And I think this is something, a huge step where we can at least stop it to become even worse, and I think that is something everybody needs to accept, even if it is it comes with a little effort.
Very good. I don't see any further questions online. There's one up here though, so we'll go to you.
Thank you. My name is Damir Fraas. I'm with Redaktionsnetzwerk Deutschland. I didn't quite get the mechanism of control, so if you would be so kind as to explain how is this working? If I'm, let's say, an importer of Brazilian beef, how do I make sure that I'm not selling beef from cattle being raised on areas which have been deforested? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, we have, when we come for the concrete example for, where did you say does the beef come from? From Brazil. From Brazil, yes. First of all, we have to see if you are the first one who imports it. Because it is there where the customs authorities are going to check it. And then we have a classification that is now being set up as well over the first 18 months after the entry into force on different levels of risk. So we have high risk countries, we have standard risk countries, and we have low risk countries. And this is as well, with the high risk countries, we have foreseen more checks to be done, quantitative meaning the percentage of a batch that you are importing, but as well quantitative on different importers. So there for the high risk, and I imagine that Brazil will probably fall under this high risk category, especially if we have seen now recently that the deforestation in Brazil, there was an article on Reuters that I recently read in March 2023, the deforestation has been 14% higher than in March 2022. So even there you can say that it's not only the political government that has changed, that has had an impact. I think there is a bigger problem. And so this is definitely then going into the high risk, and there will be more checks to be done. If then, and there we have then as well, and this is the core element, we have the geolocation system. So we need to know from which farm does this cow come from. And we have the cutoff date, which is the 31st of December 2020. We have satellite images, so we can couple this if on this plot of land there have been forests on that cutoff date, then we are not going to import it. And that is the work that the customs authorities will have to do then.
And maybe a last question from here again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wester for EU Observer. So on your last point, you mentioned satellite images. I'm also trying to get a grip on the administrative burden that you imagine this is going to have, because you compare it with GMOs, which I think is in a different order of scale, perhaps. But could you explain to me how these two compare and how GMO could be an example of trying to implement this legislation successfully?
I mentioned the concrete soy GMO example because I know that certain farmers' association in the European Union, they need protein crops for their cattle, but they don't want them to be GMOs. So, and then as well for the production of certain food that we are eating, well, of course, nobody wants GMOs. Well, I think most of the people don't want GMOs. So there is a second distribution cycle that has been set up because there were people able to say, well, we have a demand for that product that is GMO-free. The product might be higher, the price might be higher for that product, yes, but that is then set up. But it will differ from the commodities. It will be very different because not all the goods are transported in the same manner. I imagine soy is something, a very basic product in the end. It will be in a huge ship, usually transported, and so we have to have a separation between, let's say, the deforestation and the deforestation-free products, and from that moment on, I think it's quite easy to do it, because if they manage it with GMOs, and therefore we have as well foreseen not only the satellite checks, but we can as well have DNA checks, which are of course expensive as well, but this is a possibility to track it back. And we have as well to say there are sanctions foreseen, because we can say we don't take that product in, but you can always try, because you don't check every batch, because that is not possible. But we have sanctions, so 4% of the company's EU turnover will be at least the sanction in case of such a criminal action in the end. So they have to be very careful, because there are financial consequences as well.
Thank you very much. That will then bring to the close this press conference. Thank you very much for coming. You will in a few minutes be able to see a recording of this press conference online. You can also get a copy of the press release either in the press room here or online. Thank you very much for attending.